Welcome back and welcome to part 2 of this Blender tutorial where I'll show you how to create this realistic grass in Blender. Now if you haven't seen the first part of the tutorial, then you can check that out with the link in the description. So in the first part we created the grass models and also the models of clover, and in this part we're going to be doing the lighting, we're going to be adding in the ground, and then we'll be using geometry nodes to distribute the grass and clover on the ground and get the final render. And if you'd like to purchase the finished project files of this tutorial and help support the channel, you can do that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page, and also the Blender Market. I'll have the project file links in the description. And after watching this tutorial, if you'd like to learn how to create more nature in Blender, then definitely check out my nature tutorial playlist. The link is in the description. So let's start by doing the lighting. So because we are going for realism here on the render engine, I'm going to be using the cycles rendering engine, and this is here on the render properties. And then while we're over here on the render properties, I'm going to scroll down here to the color management, and I'm going to use the view transform of filmic. And on the look here, I'm going to change this to the very high contrast because it'll pop out the colors and make everything more contrasted and saturated. So let's now add in that HDRI to get some realistic lighting. So I'll hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view so we can see what this looks like in the rendered mode. And to add in the HDRI, I'll go here to the world properties, and on the yellow dot here next to color, we're going to choose the environment texture, and then we'll click on open and open up the texture. And then here is the Whipple Creek Gazebo 1K HDRI, and I mentioned this in part 1 of the tutorial series, and all the free links to all the resources are in the description. So I downloaded the 1K version and HDR version on Polyhaven. Let's just click on open image, and now we have some much more realistic lighting to the scene, and that grass looks quite a bit more realistic. And also if I look here, you can see that because we added that translucency, there's actually light going through the grass. Now I also want to add a sunlight, so I will go back to solid view. Let's go to front view, and I'll go to the add menu. We'll go down here to light, and I'll add a sunlight. Let's move the sunlight up here and kind of rotate it over a bit, and we'll rotate it back here to the side. And then I'll go back up into the rendered view so we can see what this is looking like. And let's click over here on the object data properties to go to the light settings, and I'm going to turn the strength up to a 6 so it is brighter. I'm also going to make the color a slightly yellow color so it looks more like sunlight. And if you want to use the same exact sunlight color I'm using, you can go to the hex value and you can punch in FFE9D1. Now also on the angle here, I'm going to change this up to 3 because the angle is going to change how sharp the shadows are. So if I turn the angle really big, you can kind of see those shadows there become very soft, but if I turn them down, the shadows are like super sharp. So I think an angle of 3 is pretty good, so they're a little bit blurred on the edges. So now that we've set up the lighting, I want to hide the grass objects because I want to be creating the ground object. So I'll go back to solid view, and right here on the grass and clover, we're going to click on this check here to hide it. And then also let's drag the sun from the collection into the main collection here. So just put it inside that main collection. So I'll now press Shift C to make sure the 3D cursor is in the center. And I'll go to the add menu and let's go to mesh, and we're going to make a plane for the ground. And I want this plane to be very big, so I'll scale it up. And then I'll type 12 and hit enter so it's much bigger, and I'll press Ctrl A, and I'm just going to apply the scale, so that's the object's new default size. We can also move the sunlight kind of up here just to get it out of the way for now. Now I'm going to go into edit mode, so hit tab to go to edit mode, and you can use the object context menu, or you can also press Ctrl E, and make sure you have the whole mesh selected when you do that, so Ctrl E, and I'm going to click on subdivide. Now right after you subdivide this, if you click right above me on the subdivide settings, here on the number of cuts, I'm going to turn this to 75 so that it is very detailed. We're going to have this very detailed because we're going to be using a displacement modifier to kind of make it bumpy. And then after we add all that detail, we're also going to press Ctrl E again, and we're going to just subdivide it one more time, but we'll leave the number of cuts this time just set to 1. So now it's nice and detailed. So we'll go back to object mode. So I now want to add a camera, and I want to place the camera kind of on the front, but also on the right side, so kind of this corner. So I'll go to the add menu, let's go down here to camera, I can just add a camera, and then just move your view to wherever you want the camera to be. And I'm going to press Ctrl-Alt-Numpad 0. Ctrl-Alt-Numpad 0 is going to bring the camera to where you are, and then you can just move the camera around by selecting the camera. I'll hit G to grab, then I'll hit Z, bring it down on the Z axis, and move it over. Also hit R to rotate, and then I can double tap the X key, and that will rotate it up and down. And I'm just going to bring it down here and bring it forward a bit. So if you hit G to grab, you can double tap the Z key and that's going to bring it in and out. We're just going to stick it right here, kind of looking into the scene. So I now want to model some hills. So we'll select the object and we'll go into edit mode. And I want to press the O key, which is going to turn on the proportional editing. This way I can select some vertices and hit G to grab, and I can scroll my mouse wheel to change the size of the proportional editing. And this is going to make the selection bigger or smaller. So it's going to pull along the mesh, which is close to the selection. And I'm just going to kind of pull around the mesh here and make some hills. So kind of in the back here, especially we're going to make some bigger hills here. Let's also select the back vertices here, make some even bigger hills, maybe another hill there, and another one here, and select a few points here and kind of bring the entire thing up a little bit. And then right here, maybe just make a few small bumps. So we'll go back to object mode, and I also want to add a displace modifier to make it bumpy. So let's go here to the modifier properties. I'll click on add modifier and we can search for the displace modifier. And then let's click on new here to add a new texture. And then we can click here and this is going to go to the texturing panel. And instead of image or movie, which is an external file, I want to change it to clouds instead. And this is basically the same thing as Blender's procedural noise. And on the settings here, I like to change the size to just like a 0.5. I think 0.5 is pretty good. And then let's click here to go back to the modifiers. And now I want to turn the strength down to like a 0.3. So it's more subtle. And then we'll use the object context menu and shade that smooth. So now you can see we have some nice bumps there. So let's go into edit mode. And I want to delete any of the vertices that we don't actually need. Because when we add the grass using the geometry nodes, it's going to be pretty laggy if there are many of the instances of the grass. And so we can delete as much of the plane that we're not using, and that way there won't be quite as many objects distributed on the plane. So I'll hold down the Z button and go to wireframe. I'll use the box select, so hit B for the box select. You can click and drag and just box select any vertices which are outside of the camera. So box select that there, and we can click and drag and box select those vertices. And I'll hit X to delete, and we can just delete the vertices. All right, go back to object mode. So if I go back to solid view, you can kind of see what this is looking like. So it'll just show what the camera can see. So let's now create a ground material. So I'm going to go here to the shading workspace. I'm going to go into the camera view and let's go into the rendered mode so we can see what this is looking like. We'll select the ground plane. Let's click on new to add a new material, and I can just call this ground or dirt. And then in the previous part of the tutorial, we enabled the Node Wrangler add-on. If you don't have that enabled, you can click on edit, you can go to the preferences, and over here on the add-ons tab, on the search, you can search for node, and just make sure you enable the Node Wrangler add-on in the user preferences. So now we're going to be adding in all the textures using the principled texture setup from the Node Wrangler. So let's select the principled shader and we're going to press Ctrl-Shift-T. Then I'll locate to the folder where I have all the images, and here's the ground 036. And again, the link is in the description to the textures if you haven't downloaded it, and I downloaded the 2K JPEG version. So once you download the zip file, you'll just extract the zip file and you can go into the folder. And then inside the folder, we just want to select the color, hold down the control key, and we want to select the normal GL and also the roughness. So with those three maps selected, I'll click on principled texture setup. And in the rendered mode now, you can see it already is placed pretty nicely on the plane, and that is because the plane on default in Blender was already UV unwrapped. However, this looks like a very small scene because you can see like little bits of grass and stuff. So to make this smaller, you could change the size of the UV editing, or you could just go over here to the mapping and you could change the mapping scale here. So I'm going to click on the scale and then drag down and then let go to change all values at the same time. And I'm just going to type in 20. So this way you can see that the texture is much smaller. Now it does look like it's tiling a bit. You can kind of see it looks like the same texture is repeated. However, you're really not going to be able to notice it once we add all the grass. So if this was just a blank ground, then I would want to do something to fix the tiling. But because we're going to be adding grass all over the scene, it's going to be super hard to notice. You're really not going to notice the tiling of the texture. Now there's a few things that I want to do to this ground because it is like a little bit light, so I want to change the colors and a few other things. One thing that I want to do is change the strength of the normal map. So I'm going to change the strength to 2 so it is double as bumpy. So instead of it just being set to 1, if I turn it up to 2, you can see it just looks quite a bit more bumpy and rough, and I like that a bit better. Now let's also go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for the RGB curves, and we'll drop this here after the base color so we can do some color correction. So on the C here for color, color, I want to drag a dot down here, and I'm going to drag it like way down here to make the dirt quite a bit darker because I think it is quite a bit too bright. Let's also click on the R for red, and I want to bump up this value just a little bit so there's a tiny bit more red. It kind of makes it look more earthy. And then if we click over here on the B for blue, let's click here and just drag this down because I want to get rid of a little bit of the blue so that looks a bit better. So already that looks like a much more rich dark earth, and I really like that a lot better. Let's also change the roughness a bit, because if I like navigate over here, you can see there's quite a bit of reflection on this dirt, and I just really want it to be more rough. So what I'll do is go to the add menu, and I can search for the hue saturation value, and we can put this between the roughness and the principled shader roughness. Now here on the value, if I turn the value up, it's going to make it lighter or darker. So I can turn the value up to like a 1.5, and now that dirt looks even more rough. So I really like how that looks now. It's a very rich dark earth, and it's a bit more bumpy. So we can now finally get started with the geometry nodes. So let's click over here to go to the geometry nodes workspace, and if you don't have a geometry nodes workspace, you can click on the plus here. You can go to general and choose geometry nodes, or you can also take any window and you can change it here to the geometry node editor. I'm going to go to the geometry nodes workspace, and let's just go into the camera view. Let's make this a bit bigger. We're just going to select the ground and we'll click on new, and then we can just call it like grass on ground. So let's add the main nodes that are going to actually distribute the grass on the ground. So I'll go to the add menu, and we're going to search for the distribute points on faces, and we'll put this in between the two nodes. And then we're also going to go to the add menu, and we're going to search for the instance on points. So instance on points, drop this here. So this is going to distribute the points along all the faces of the mesh. This is actually going to instance our grass models, but you can see that now the object has disappeared. That is because we need to add up the original geometry. So we're going to go to the add menu, and we're going to search for a join geometry, and we'll put this here after the instance on points. And this original geometry from the 3D view, this can go into the geometry. So now we're joining the original geometry back up. So now we need to actually add the data, which is going to be the grass. So I'll go to the add menu, and we're going to search for the collection info node, because this is going to give it all the information of the grass and clover collection. So on the collection here, we're going to choose the grass and clover, and the instance can go on to the instance of the instance on points. So now you can see it's adding it, but there's a problem here, and that is that it's adding all of them in a row, because that's how they're added in the collection. Now to make sure this isn't too laggy, let's just turn the density down for now. So turn the density maybe just to like a 1. And now what we can do is we can click on the separate children and the reset children and the pick instance. And this is going to make it so it's randomly going to select different parts of the grass. It's going to select each object randomly. So let's go into the rendered viewport mode to see how this is looking. And already we have some nice realistic grass on our scene. Now to make it look more random and more organic, I want to have a random scale and random rotation for each object. So I'm going to go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for the random value node, and we'll drop this here. And this random value can go into the scale so that each object is slightly bigger or slightly smaller. Let's also turn the density up a little bit so I can see more of them. So on the minimum value here, I want to change it to like a 0.2 so the objects can't be so small that you can't see them. And then for the maximum, I want to turn this to maybe like a 0.8 so they're all a little bit smaller. But now you can see that each object has a random different size, and that makes it look a bit more natural and organic. Let's also box select these nodes and bring them back a bit. And I also want to put a random rotation so that they actually look more random. So I'll duplicate the random value node. Let's drop it here. And then on the float type here, I'm going to change it to vector instead. And vector is going to give us 3 values, so the X, Y, and Z axis. And that way we can rotate them around individually on the X, Y, and Z. So let's take the value, and I can put that into the rotation. So it'll be randomly rotated around. And then I can change the values here. So the minimum, I can just leave that at 0. And then on the maximum here, I'm going to start by clicking down and then letting go. And I'll change all of them to 0.4 so they're all rotated around slightly. So you can see if I turn this up more and more, they're randomly going to be rotated. But I don't want to rotate them too much because I don't want them to go underneath the ground. So I'm just going to turn them to 0.4. Now as far as this bottom one here, this one is the Z. You can see if I rotate this around, they're all just rotating around on the Z axis. So for this one, I'm going to click on it, and then I'm going to type TAU for tau, and then hit enter. And this is going to give us this value here, the 6.283. And this is going to make sure that it's rotating around by 360 degrees randomly. Now, of course, if you wanted to, you could just drag this way up to like a really big number, like 1,000, to make it super random, but this number will make sure it'll rotate it all the way around. So now we can turn up the density here, and we can just turn it up more and more to make it super dense. However, with real grass fields, there usually isn't a super even amount of grass, so some parts have a little bit less grass and maybe have some empty areas, and then some other areas are thicker with more grass. So I'm going to be putting a noise texture into the density to make there be some clumps with more grass and then other parts which are more empty. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for a noise texture, and let's drop this here. And the factor, this can go into the density. Now it's not very strong right now, so you can't really see what's happening. I'm going to navigate to the top here. So I want to make it more strong. So to do that, I can go to the add menu and I can search for the math node, and we're going to put the math node in between the noise and the distribute points on faces. And then click on the add type here, and we can change it to multiply instead. So this multiply is going to multiply the noise texture values to make it a lot stronger. So if I turn this value up more and more, you can see now it's going to be very strong. And then let's change some of the noise texture settings. So I want to leave all the settings how they are except the scale. I want to turn the scale to 1 instead. And then if I turn up the value more and more and make it really strong, you can kind of start to see it happening. So you can see there's a few spots here where there's a lot more grass, and the other spots like here where there's less grass. Now it's still a little bit hard to notice, and I want to make it even stronger. So what I'm going to do is go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and I'll put the color ramp in between the noise texture and the multiply. So just stick it right there. And then if I drag these values together, that's going to make it more contrasty. And if it's getting a bit laggy, you can turn this value down to maybe just like a 50. So now I can drag these values together. We'll make it more contrasty, so it's making that noise texture more contrasty. But then I want to change this value right here, so this color here of this one, because if this is turned all the way down to black, it's going to be fully empty. And so if this is fully black, there aren't going to be any grass in those empty areas. But I want to still have some grass even in the more sparse areas, so I'm going to make it a mid-gray color so that even in the darker areas, there still are going to be some grass. And the exact value that I'm going to be using is going to be a hex value of 737373. So now we can turn up this value and make it much stronger, and we can just add lots more. So if I turn this up really big, now you can really start to see it happening. So like right over here, there's a lot more grass, but then right over here, there's not quite as much grass. So you should definitely be careful with the multiply value, because if you turn it up way too big, then it can be quite laggy. I, however, am going to turn my value to 1500. So 1500. And if that is too laggy for your scene, then you may need to turn it down a bit. Now, another thing that I find really helps to make the final render look more realistic is if we add a little bit of shadows along the scene to kind of make it look like maybe there's some trees in the background. So what I'm going to do is go to the add menu, and for now I'm just going to search for a value node, and we're going to put the value node right up here, and then this value here, we can copy that value and we can paste the value right here into the value node. So now that we have that value there, we can just take this value and turn it way down for now. So I'm going to turn it way down to maybe just like a 200, so it's not quite as laggy, but then right when we're ready to do the final render, we can turn it up, and then it will be a bit laggy, but we're just going to render the scene. And maybe I'll even turn this down farther to just like a 100. But then once we're ready to render the final image, we could actually just plug this value up to the value there to override that value. All right, so let's go back here to the layout, and what I want to do is go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for another plane. And let's bring the plane up so I can see it. Then I'm going to scale this plane, and I'll type in 10 and then enter. And I'll press Ctrl A and just apply the scale. Then we'll go into edit mode, and I'll press Ctrl E again, and we're going to subdivide this. And then here on the subdivide number of cuts, I'm going to turn the number of cuts to 60, so there's about that many cuts, and then close that. So I can go back to object mode, and I can now rotate this and move it over. And if I go up into the rendered viewport mode, you can see this is going to cast a shadow on the ground. So for now, I'm just going to move it over here. You can scale up a bit bigger if you want to, and maybe bring it a bit farther back, so something like that. And just put it right over there. And we can change this later if we need to, but for now, I'll just stick it right there. So now let's go back to solid view, and I'm going to go into edit mode, and I want to click here to go to the face select, and then I'll deselect everything. And we're going to select random faces and delete them so that it looks like there is light coming through, and it'll kind of look like there are trees in the background and some light is coming through the trees. So what I'll do is click on select, and then we're going to do the select random, and then I'll hit X to delete, and we're going to delete the faces. So you can see now there's kind of this cool pixel effect. But if I go into the rendered view, you can see the sunlight is going to rotate down, and actually if I rotate the sunlight over, maybe rotate it over like that, you can now see that there's that really cool effect where there's just little bits of light kind of scattered on the ground. And you can also select this and scale it up more if you need to, maybe rotate it over a little bit. And then you can go into edit mode and you can make sure the proportional editing is still turned on. Let's go back to solid view so it's not so laggy. And I'll go here to the vertex select, and I'm going to select a vertex and then hit R to rotate. And you can scroll your mouse wheel to change the size of the proportional editing, and you can also move it around. And I'm just going to rotate some of these and make them look more random and natural to make it look more like this is actually leaves from a tree. So I'll rotate that, kind of pull it out, maybe rotate this here, rotate that over, just make it look more natural and random. Let's go back to object mode. We can use the object context menu and shade that smooth. And shading this smooth just reminded me that I want to make sure that the other objects are shaded smooth as well. So real quick, if we hide the collection and then unhide the grass and clover, if you zoom in here and box select these objects, I want to just make sure that I shade them smooth with the object context menu. I believe I did that before, but I just want to make sure those are shaded smooth. So we'll hide the grass and clover and unhide the collection. So let's go back into the rendered mode and see how that's looking. And by kind of rotating those around, it looks much more organic, and it kind of looks like leaves and sunlight coming through the leaves. Now I also want to add a material to this, so let's select the object. We'll go here to the shading, and let's click on new to add a new material. And here in the shading workspace, if you scroll over and click right here on the shading, we were using this built-in HDRI in Blender, but I'm going to click on the scene world and scene light, so it's actually using the normal scene world. So that's actually what's going to show up in the final render. So we added a new material to the object, and we can just call it shadow leaves. So it's going to be a shadow. And then for this material, I'm going to go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for the translucent shader, and let's plug it up to the surface. And if I select the principled shader, I can just delete it. So I go back over here and then take the color. I'm going to make the color of the translucency kind of like a green color. So there's a bit of green light shining down, because if light is coming through leaves, it's going to be kind of a greenish color. And the hex value that I'll be using for this translucent color is going to be a hex value of 007414. So there's another thing that I want to do to make this look a lot more realistic and make it look nicer, and that is that I actually want to make a nice background, because right now that HDRI in the background doesn't look that nice and it's really pixelated. So what I'm going to do is add in a different HDRI just that the background can see. So I'll click on object right here in the shader editor, and we're going to change this to world so we can edit the world nodes. And then I'm going to select both the background and the HDRI, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate and drop them down here, so we now have two of them. But then this bottom one here, I'm going to delete it, so get rid of that HDRI, and we'll open in a new HDRI. And in the textures folder, I downloaded this rural asphalt road from polyhaven.com. Again, link is in the description. And I downloaded the 4K version and the HDR version from Polyhaven. And I downloaded the 4K version because we're actually going to be seeing it in the background, so I want it to be higher resolution. So let's just open that image. Now, if you plug this background up to the surface here, I do like how it looks in the background. The background looks nicer, but I don't really like how the shading looks or how it looks on the ground. It looks a little bit too bright. So we're going to be using this for the lighting, but then we're going to be using this to actually see it in the background. Now to do this, we need to go to the add menu and we need to add a mix shader. We'll drop the mix shader here, and we're going to plug both of these up to the shaders. Now the factor is going to determine which one we're going to use, but instead of just randomly blending between them, I want to make the camera see this one, but I want the lighting to be affected by this one. So we'll go to the add menu, and we're going to search for the light path node. Let's put this up here, and we can take the is camera ray and we can put that into the factor. So now what's happening is this Whipple Creek gazebo is lighting the scene, but we can just see the rural asphalt road in the background. So now what I want to do is just kind of rotate the asphalt road around so that it looks a bit nicer. So I'm going to select the HDRI and I'll press Ctrl T. That is using the Node Wrangler add-on, and it's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping. And I can now just change the rotation values to rotate it around. So for my scene, I found that around 187 looks pretty good. So I'll rotate that around, maybe just bring it down a little bit farther. So something like this, bring it a little bit more. So maybe even just change it to a 190. 190 is pretty good. So I really like how this looks. I like all the things I can see in the background. And then if you want to change the rotation X and Y at the same time, you can click and drag down and then drag back and forth, and this will rotate it up and down. So if you want to like rotate it down a little bit so you can see some of the landscape a little bit better, you can do that, or you can just drag them up a little bit if you don't want to be able to see them as much. So I'll just drag that up like that. Something like that is pretty nice. So now it looks like we're kind of looking up at a grassy hill, and then there's all that stuff in the background there, and there's a nice sky. So let's just do a few more things to make the final image look nice. So I do want to add a bit of a depth of field. So I'll go to the add menu. Let's go down here to empty, and I can just add a sphere empty. And then to move the empty around, you can hit G to grab and then hit Shift Z. Shift Z will exclude the Z axis, and I'm going to move the empty kind of to about here, and then I can scale the empty down and bring it up a little bit. And the empty object is where the camera is going to focus on. So if I click here to select the camera, we can actually go back here to the layout and go into the camera view. Let's zoom in here. And if you go to the camera settings, the object data properties, you can turn on depth of field. And then here on the focus object, if you click on the eyedropper, you can choose that empty object. And then you can change the f-stop value to something that you like, and I think that a value of 6 is pretty good. So you definitely don't want to turn it too low because that looks very unrealistic, but I do want kind of some things in the background to be just a little bit blurred, and you can see that is now just a little bit more blurred, but then kind of right down here the grass looks much more in focus. So let's go here to the render properties, and I'm going to open up the sampling, and I'm going to go to the render samples, and I'm going to turn the samples to 200 so that it looks a bit nicer, and also I'm going to turn on the denoise here so it denoises the image when it renders. Now to make it render a bit faster, we can open up the light paths here, and we can turn off more of the light paths so that it renders faster. So I'm going to turn off the reflective and refractive caustics and the filter glossy, and also the direct light and also the indirect light. And then we're also not using any transparency, so we can turn that down. However, we do need some transmission and the diffuse and glossy because we're using some transmission because we're using the translucency. So the transmission, the glossy, and the diffuse and the total, I'll just turn those to 2, but then the other things I can all leave at 0 so it renders a little bit faster. Also right here, this empty object in the outliner, I can just drag it here into the collection just to keep it nicely organized. So then finally, before we actually render the final image, I'm going to go right back over here to the geometry nodes. Let's go back to solid view, and I can just take this number here and I can put it up to the value, or I can copy this value and I can just delete the value and just paste it right in here, so 1500. So now it has lots of grass. So before you render this, you should go File and just save this just in case it crashes for some reason. And then to render this, you can click on Render and Render Image. And there is the finished rendered image, and so that is how you can create a realistic grassy field in Blender. So I hope you found this video helpful, and thank you so much for watching. And if you'd like to purchase the finished project files and get the finished Blender file with the grassy field, as well as the grass models to use for your projects, then you can find the product links in the description and purchase the project files. And that's also a great way to help support this channel. And if you'd like to help support the channel monthly, then joining my Patreon memberships is a great way to do that, and so you'll be supporting the channel monthly, and you'll also get access to lots of Blender content like 3D models and assets, tutorial files, artwork project files, procedural materials, geometry node modifier setups, and lots more Blender content. Or if you'd like to just make a one-time purchase of one of my products, then my Gumroad store is a great place to do that. And if you'd like to learn how to create more nature in Blender, you can check out my Blender nature tutorial playlist with the link in the description, and I have many more nature tutorials. But I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching.